So the private placement regime will remain in place at least until 2017, when it will be reviewed. And the question mark is post-2017, whether the private placement regime remains in place. Our hope is that in 2015, we will achieve a passport, and we will allow full choice then to our clients in terms of, do they want to go private placement regime, or do they want to access the passport? The passport, however, will require full compliance with the AIFMD and everything that goes with it, including appointment of depository, and making sure all the contractual arrangements are properly mapped out in compliance with the directive itself. So what is the impact of these dates? Well, first of all, as I said already, passive marketing is not actually regulated under the directive. No impact, right? In France, they call it reverse solicitation. 2013 is clearly a date that impacts asset managers in terms of their access into Europe. Will they onshore? And I'll come back to that in a moment. Continuing access to the European institutional capital under the private placement regime, not impacted, but it actually gives you the opportunity to see how does the directive actually play out in practice. What are the real consequences by being compliant with AIFMD? And I think certain jurisdictions will be better positioned to provide certainty to advisors as this directive plays out. And I believe Jersey is one of those. And again, that's been validated by our clients. The key third country provisions that need to be complied with from 2013 on, we need to have a cooperation agreement in place between the home member state accessed and the third country supervisor. And I'll come back to that again in a minute. We must ensure that we're not on the non-cooperative financial action task force list. Right? Jersey is not on that list. Jersey leads the way in terms of being compliant with the Financial Action Task Force recommendations. We do have to be compliant with the transparency provisions in relation to reporting to investors and reporting private equity activity, but that's no different to an onshore manager. And from 2015 onwards, under the passport regime, as well as complying in full with the directive, we need to ensure that we've got TIAs in place, exchange of information agreements, tax information sharing agreements. Again, Jersey's actually led that initiative well in advance of any draft directive. So I think, again, we're ahead of the game on that. Strategic plan for Jersey PLC. Huge difference, by the way, in how Jersey's reacted to this directive, as against what happened in the early 90s when a lot of the retail industry disappeared from the island. What I've seen is industry, service providers, regulator, and government joined at the hips in terms of making sure that we respond to the challenges that the AIFMD provided back in April 2009. So our strategy is really to make sure that Jersey continues to be a viable location for alternative asset management. In terms of what we're doing, we've got a project oversight board in place which has a representative from government, representative from two of the major law firms on the island, representative from JerseyFinance, representative from the regulator, and everything we do is coordinated and directed. What we've been looking at is product impact across a broad range of products, be it real estate, private equity, hedge funds, making sure that we really understand the technical consequences of the directive. Looking at third country provisions, how do we make sure, again, that we're ready in advance of 2013? And one of the things we started to explore now in response to some of our clients asking is actually an opt-in AIFMD fully compliant regime in advance of 2015. Why? Because certain institutional investors may actually ask the alternative asset managers, are you compliant? Yes, no. So in the due diligence process, there may be certain advisors that actually want an AIFMD compliant regime. So that's something else we're looking at. In terms of communication, clear articulation of what we're trying to do as a jurisdiction, making sure it's a two-way dialogue with clients of the island, asset managers based in the island, but a message that's bought into by regulator, government, and industry. Looking at regulators in the onshore environment, i.e. within continental Europe and in the UK. We're also opening a Brussels office in June. It's a joint office with Guernsey. One of the key objectives behind that will be to continue to share the compelling story that we have as a jurisdiction, educating MEPs and the Commission about what we do. Because one of the things we're hearing, I mean, we're pretty well known in the UK in terms of our abilities as such, but there are certain jurisdictions who don't really appreciate what we do. So we've got to make sure we continue to tell that story. So it's proactive. One of the things that we did then was we said, okay, how do we sense check that as an island we're doing the right things? So we started a survey, we're in the middle of it at the moment, reaching out to advisors off the island who are currently using the island and getting their feedback as to what they want us to do. To put these messages in context, the value of funds that those advisors look after with a Jersey connection is $165 billion. So these are fairly significant clients. The first thing that they've said to us is that non-EU managers and non-EU funds will not be replaced by onshore solutions. It is not going to happen, all right? They're also confident because a number of these advisors use products in other jurisdictions. They're confident that this jurisdiction will meet the ongoing requirements to ensure access to EU institutional investors. Another thing we wanted to establish is what are the important markets for you as an advisor so that we target our efforts in looking at those jurisdictions and building relationships with those jurisdictions. And these are the key markets for those particular clients. We explored the option of providing an AIFMD light regime, such as we believe Switzerland has done. But as Alan Dubois, chairman of Lixor, said to me, he has a sense of humor, he said, it's a bit like drinking a false whiskey. I want to know when I'm drinking. And he believes that actually, and I think other clients share this view, if you're going to introduce a compliant regime, it's got to be fully compliant, with all the ugly bits, unfortunately, in it as well. But that's something that we're looking to introduce, but retain flexibility. So the existing product range remains in place, but you have the option to have a fully compliant regime if you want it. But we should prioritize our efforts in making sure ongoing access is protected under the private placement regime, and that's what we're going to do. So, simple strategy, two-step, focus on the private placement regime, engage with ESMA on third country provisions. What we're going to do is we're actually going to reach out into other significant third country jurisdictions because nobody's picked this one up. And we want to start getting some engagement around cooperation agreements and how do we actually ensure that the market remains open for a third country jurisdiction. We will provide an AIFMD compliant regime. We will try to have that in place by 2013. And I think actually it's a good way of demonstrating to the European Commission that we're serious about regulation. So in summary, we started looking at AIFMD from 2009. Certainly in 2010, we started looking at the impact of this legislation on product. We're now in the middle of actually implementing various actions to make sure that we continue to offer the right jurisdiction. And we will be compliant in advance of 2013. And I think we will continue to differentiate ourselves on this particular agenda.